He was the golden boy of the police department. The detective everyone trusted, the man with medals on his chest, and the city in the palm of his hand. When criminals ran wild, he stopped them. When gangs ruled the streets, he brought them down. To the public, he wasn't just a cop. He was a legend. The kind of hero who made people believe justice still existed. But legends aren't always what they seem. Behind the polished uniform, behind the handshakes, behind the newspaper headlines that called him the watchdog of the city, there was another story. A darker one. Because every case he solved was one he himself created. Every robbery he investigated was one he orchestrated. Every criminal he supposedly hunted was his own shadow, slipping through his fingers by design. This isn't just the story of a bad cop. It isn't even just the story of corruption. No, this is something else entirely. This is the story of a man who built his entire career on lies so perfectly crafted that even the police themselves, the very people who worked by his side, didn't notice the monster standing next to them. He wasn't chasing criminals. He was chasing himself. Think about that for a second. Think about the man sworn to protect you being the one who robs you blind. Think about the detective who promises to keep the city safe while secretly planning its destruction. And ask yourself, how long could a man live a double life like this? How long could he balance on a knife's edge before everything came crashing down? The answer might shock you. So sit back, turn off the lights, and lean in close. Because once this story starts, you won't be able to look away. You're watching true crime videos, where every story is darker than it seems. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because this case isn't just wild, it's one you'll be thinking about long after it ends. The city was bleeding. Crime was everywhere. Gang shootings, robberies, drugs on every corner. And then came the robberies. Not just any robberies. These were professional, surgical, like something out of a movie. Armed men in masks stormed banks in broad daylight, holding hostages at gunpoint, clearing out vaults with military precision. People were terrified. Nobody felt safe. Every week, another bank. Every week, another set of lives shattered. And the police? They were always one step behind. That's when he appeared. The detective. The one everyone would come to know by name. The one reporters called the man who saved the city. It started with small victories. A suspect caught here. A getaway car stopped there. But quickly it grew. He was everywhere. Always arriving just in time. Always uncovering evidence no one else could find. Always holding a press conference with quiet, humble confidence that made the public adore him. He didn't crave attention, or at least he pretended not to. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't arrogant. He was calm, collected, a man who let results speak louder than words. And the results? They were staggering. In 1 year alone, he was credited with solving more bank robberies than any other officer in the department's history. He was promoted, awarded medals, even photographed shaking hands with the mayor on the front page of the newspaper. Mothers pointed to his picture and told their children, "This is what a hero looks like." But here's what nobody knew. The reason he was always in the right place at the right time wasn't luck. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't brilliance. It was design. He wasn't stopping the crimes. He was creating them. When he stood on that stage, medals gleaming under the lights, his hands were trembling. Not from nerves. Not from pride. From guilt. From the weight of knowing that every clap, every cheer, every word of praise was built on lies. And yet, he smiled. Because the higher he climbed, the safer he became. Or at least, that's what he thought. The robberies weren't sloppy smash and grabs. They weren't desperate acts by amateurs. These heists were clean, precise, flawless. The kind of jobs that made veteran detectives scratch their heads and mutter, "This isn't normal." The crew always moved like clockwork. They knew exactly when the guards rotated, which alarms were fake, and which ones mattered. They knew how long it took the nearest patrol car to respond. They even knew which back alleys stayed dark because the city hadn't fixed the streetlights in years. And every time, without fail, they disappeared into thin air. No stray fingerprints. No DNA. No cameras that actually caught their faces. It was as if the robbers knew the police playbook before the game even started. The department was baffled. But not him. While his fellow officers scratched their heads, he was already at the scene, leaning against his car with that same calm, confident look. While others ran in circles, he was finding evidence. A mask left behind. A discarded glove. A getaway car spotted just a few blocks away. To the public, it was genius. To his colleagues, it was luck. To his bosses, it was proof he was destined for greatness. But in reality, it was theater. He was staging both sides of the play. He knew what to leave behind and what to take with him. He knew how to make himself look brilliant while keeping suspicion far away. Think about it. He was writing the case files on his own crimes. He was solving puzzles he himself built. Of course he looked brilliant. Of course he looked unstoppable. And as each victory stacked higher, his reputation grew. Reporters lined up to interview him. His photo appeared on magazine covers. The city clung to him as a symbol of hope. But symbols can be dangerous. Because the brighter the spotlight shines, the darker the shadows it creates. And in those shadows, the truth waited. Patiently, silently, waiting for the first mistake. Fade in eerie ticking clock sound, cutting to a darker warehouse scene. Every hero has a mask. But his mask wasn't the badge. It was the badge that was hiding his real face. Because when the lights of the police station dimmed, when the applause of the press conference faded, he disappeared into a world the public could never imagine. A warehouse. Abandoned. Silent. Dust and shadows. This was his kingdom. Here, the detective wasn't a hero. He wasn't a man of the law. He was something else entirely. The mastermind. The architect. The man who turned crime into art. He laid his badge on the table like a prop in a theater, then rolled out blueprints of the very banks he was sworn to protect. He studied patrol schedules, alarm codes, police radio chatter. Information that only a detective could access, now being fed straight into the hands of criminals. And the crew? They weren't masterminds. They weren't visionaries. They were soldiers. Soldiers who obeyed. Soldiers who feared him. Because make no mistake, he wasn't just their partner. He was their God. When he spoke, they listened. When he gave orders, they followed. And when they hesitated, he reminded them just who controlled the information, just who could make or break their lives. Some said he was ruthless. Others whispered he was brilliant. But inside the warehouse, there was no question. He was both. And yet, deep inside, he still told himself he wasn't the villain. No, he twisted the story in his mind. He convinced himself he was different from the thieves and killers he arrested by day. He told himself he was taking back from corrupt banks that preyed on the poor. He told himself the city was rotten, and he was just cashing in. But lies have a way of growing. Because soon, it wasn't about justice. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about money. It was about the rush. The rush of walking into a police station with stolen millions hidden just blocks away. The rush of smiling at the mayor while knowing his hands were stained with crime. The rush of being untouchable, uncatchable, unstoppable. He wasn't addicted to the money. He was addicted to the double life. Heartbeat rises. Camera closes in on his cold stare as he hides the badge under stolen cash. But perfection doesn't last forever. Every great act eventually slips. It started with something small. A security guard. A man who'd seen too much, who'd been on shift during 2 different robberies. A man who began to notice the same pattern no one else did. The detective was always there. Not too late. Not too early. always perfectly timed, almost as if he knew, almost as if someone had told him. The guard wrote a report. Detailed, careful. He sent it up the chain of command. He believed it was his duty, his responsibility. But the report never reached internal affairs. It never even left the precinct. Because the detective got to it first. He buried it, shredded it, burned it, wiped it clean from the system as if it had never existed. And so the truth, the first crack in his armor, was silenced. But cracks don't vanish. They spread. And this one was only the beginning. Every empire falls from within. And his was no different. For months, the robberies went flawlessly. The crew obeyed. The money flowed. And the detective, with his badge in one hand and stolen bills in the other, lived untouchable. But greed is a slow poison. One night, in the warehouse, the air turned heavy. The crew gathered around the table, bags of cash stacked high, the smell of gasoline and gunpowder lingering in the air. Then a voice broke the silence. "Why do you always take the biggest cut?" The words echoed. The detective's eyes narrowed. A bag of money was shoved across the table. Another voice joined in, angrier this time. "We're the ones with masks on. We're the ones with guns in our hands. We're the ones risking bullets. And yet you sit behind a desk and take more than all of us combined." The detective didn't flinch. He simply stared. Cold. Calculated. The kind of stare that made even hardened criminals shift in their seats. Finally, he spoke. "Because without me, you'd all be dead. You'd have been caught the first night. You think you run this? No, I run this. I know the alarms. I know the schedules. I know the holes in the system. Without me, you're nothing but fools with guns and masks." The room went silent again. But silence didn't mean loyalty. The seed of doubt had been planted. And once planted, doubt grows. Whispers began. Behind his back. In hushed tones. In smoky bars. In late-night phone calls. The crew had once feared him. Now they resented him. And resentment, mixed with greed, is a dangerous thing. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that one of his own men had already begun reaching out. A quiet meeting with someone who wasn't supposed to know. A quiet trade of information for safety, for freedom, for a promise that when everything came crashing down, one man would walk away untouched. The betrayal didn't come from the police. It didn't come from internal affairs. It came from the inside, from the very men he trusted. And betrayal, once set in motion, cannot be undone. Low rumble of thunder, fade to black. While he played hero in public and king in private, something else was happening in the shadows. Internal affairs had been watching. Not openly, quietly, patiently. They had noticed the patterns others missed. The reports that didn't add up. The timelines that didn't make sense. And when whispers reached their ears, whispers from a man inside his own crew, the puzzle pieces started to fall into place. They didn't move fast. They didn't storm in. No, they let him play his game. They let him think he was untouchable. And with every robbery, every press conference, every staged victory, they gathered more evidence. Night after night, agents sat in dark rooms staring at walls covered in photos, maps, strings connecting points across the city. And every string led back to him. The man who looked like the savior of the city was, in truth, its greatest predator. So they set a trap. The next robbery, the biggest one yet. Downtown, a bank that held millions in cash. A heist so bold it would either crown him as untouchable forever or destroy him completely. The stage was set. The trap was ready. And the detective? He had no idea he was walking into his own grave. Sound of ticking clock, overlapping with muffled radio chatter. The night of the robbery was supposed to be perfect. The crew was buzzing. The detective was calm, confident as always. They stormed the downtown bank, masks on, weapons drawn. The air was electric. Millions of dollars waiting behind reinforced glass. But something was wrong. Too wrong. The streets outside were too quiet. The alarms tripped too easily. The silence wasn't silence at all. It was a setup. And then, the sirens. Not minutes later. Not after the getaway. No. Immediately. Floodlights snapped on. Doors slammed shut. SWAT units moved in. The crew panicked. Shouts filled the bank. Guns were raised, money dropped. But the detective? He froze. Because in that moment, his radio crackled. But it wasn't his men. It wasn't his police team. It was the FBI. And the voice said only one thing. We've been waiting for you. For the first time, the mask slipped. The calm, confident hero cracked. His hands trembled. His eyes darted. The man who had outsmarted everyone realized he had outsmarted himself. His crew fell apart. Some dropped their weapons. Others tried to fight. But it didn't matter. The building was surrounded. The detective looked at the exits. None. He looked at his men. Traitors. He looked at his badge hidden beneath his jacket and realized it was over. The hunter had become the hunted. Gunfire echoes, then silence, then slow, heavy breathing. In one night, the empire collapsed. The crew was in chains. The detective, once the city's hero, was shoved into the back of a squad car, his head pressed against cold steel. The newspapers didn't call him a savior anymore. They called him a fraud, a thief, a disgrace. His mugshot spread across every screen. The same face that once smiled on magazine covers now stared blankly, hollow, lifeless. The mayor, the same man who once called him the city's watchdog, stood on live television and spat out the words, "He betrayed us. He betrayed all of us." The medals were stripped. The applause was gone. The detective who lived two lives now had none. But even in chains, even as the walls of prison closed in, there was one more secret, one more twist. In prison, he barely spoke. Days passed in silence. Weeks, months, until one day, during a rare interview, he leaned forward. His eyes, once calm, now dark and dangerous, locked onto the reporters. And with a faint smile, he whispered for words. I wasn't the only one. The room froze. He leaned back, shadows swallowing his face. And then he laughed. Not loud, not hysterical, just a quiet laugh, like a man who knew a secret no one else dared to say out loud. So was he just a lone wolf? Or was he telling the truth? Were there others? Detectives? Judges? Politicians? How high did the corruption go? How deep did the rot spread? No one knew. And maybe, that's the scariest part. The detective who fooled an entire city, who robbed banks by day and investigated them by night, may be locked away now, but the questions he left behind still haunt us. Who else was involved? Was he really alone? Or did he take the fall for something bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than we could ever imagine? That's the problem with corruption. It hides in plain sight. It smiles at cameras. It shakes hands with mayors. And sometimes, it even wears a badge. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because if you thought this story was shocking, then the next video